Okay, welcome back, people, to the Regeneration Podcast. Michael Martin here with my my brother in arms, Mike Sauter. How's it going, Mike?
Good. It's been a while, hasn't it?
It's been a while.
We're like
Because
occasional friends who meet up on a computer every once in a while, and we call it a podcast called Regeneration.
it's because we're living in chaotic times.
Yeah.
Crazy times. And we're so happy though, because today my friend and our friend Sebastian Morello returns to the podcast to talk about this here book, Mysticism, Magic, and Monasteries, amongst other things. And hey, Sebastian, how's hunting
Hello,
going?
Jack. Very nice to be with you again.
Yeah, welcome back. That what the conversation we had about hunting, I got a lot of great feedback on that. Both of you had anecdotes that the medium was the message. The way you talked was with reverence. So it wasn't just what you were saying, but I think both of you met over the same way of talking about the subject matter that people found very enlightening.
Well, and this is the heart of hunting season for you in England, is it not?
Well, I mean, England's weird in that regard because it's sort of hunting season all year round here. So, I mean, this is a great time for fallow, for example. But you know, all through spring and summer, you've got roebuck, which is fantastic. And whilst the game birds aren't shot at that time, you have wood pigeon during that period. So, I mean, it's England. You have to understand, England is such a land of conflict. It's such a land of tension, and one of those tensions is the tension over rural life, I suppose. So you've got a really powerful urban oligarchy who are very dominant as power holders in the United Kingdom, who really hate the countryside because it
Mhm.
represents something organic and inherited, and something that can't be reduced to abstractions and controlled in the same way. You know, it's something that you have to be inducted into and initiated into. And and so they're always trying to come down like a ton of bricks on farming people and hunting people. And so, and yet at the same time, England also is like a sort of field sportsman's paradise, because there's never a time of the year when you can't be out hunting.
Oh,
It's great. Yeah, it
yeah.
is great.
Interesting.
Yeah, in Michigan, there's not much to hunt right now besides rabbits and squirrels. But I have, you'll see, a shotgun shell in my pocket.
From this morning?
Well, I always have it in my pocket because this is the time of the year when possums start stealing chickens and eggs. So I have to be always on call, and I don't want to be looking for shells, so I have one in my pocket at all time, and I have a 410 by the door.
Yeah,
So,
we never had a problem like that until we imported your minks in the 1950s
Oh
into
wow,
England.
I pity you. They're vicious, vicious,
It
vicious.
was an incredibly stupid thing to do.
Yeah.
Uh, so yeah, now we've got an American mink problem throughout the whole
oh my,
country.
yeah, that's not a good thing.
Wow. They're so savage.
Well, we
They'll
have
just
there's all
wow.
kinds of critters that will eat chickens and eggs around here. Raccoons are big. Raccoons taste pretty good though.
Yeah, I've
Possum,
heard that. I've heard that. That's interesting. Yeah.
it's kind of a cross between pork and beef. It's closer to pork. It's like bear. It's a little bit like bear meat.
Right.
Um,
Golly.
but
Well, there you have it.
so that's what that's where we are right now. Though it has actually just passed Candlemas and St. Bridget's Day. You know, it's nice to have a little more light on the subject in the world. And also, since the last time we talked to Sebastian, he and his wife have welcomed a new baby into the world.
Oh wow. I guess I heard that and I'd forgotten. Sebastian, congratulations to you and yours.
Yeah, thank you. Number four,
Yeah.
Bertie, Albert.
Was this
Yeah.
right before or after Christmas?
Yeah, I should know that, shouldn't I? 19th of December, so just before Christmas.
Okay,
Yeah.
very good.
I think the answer is yes, you should know that, but
How
I
is
too
everybody
don't
adjusting?
often know the things I should.
How,
He was actually born in the passenger seat next to me in the car.
oh,
So
really? Yeah.
we never quite got to the hospital. It's
Oh,
so that
that's
was quite
good. That's a good
yeah,
story.
yeah.
I was born en route.
That's
You
right.
make it sound almost natural, Sebastian.
So today, amongst other things, we'll see where the conversation takes us. But one of the things we're going to talk about is this book here. And it's funny, you'll love this, Sebastian. So just a couple weeks ago, a friend of mine, and Mike knows him, Michael Sullivan.
Yeah. I don't know him well, but I know who he is. He's a
You know who he
character.
is.
Yeah.
But I am actually I'm the godfather of his daughter. He has, I don't know, 9, 10 kids. Sophia, his daughter, who's now about 4. I'm the godfather. And I hear from Mike, once a week, very often. And he texted me last week or something, and he sent me a picture of something, and I wasn't sure what it was. I said, "What's that?" Yeah, it's a mace.
Oh, very good.
And because the last chapter in Sebastian's book is about his training with the mace that I don't know if he still do it. It's like
Every day.
it's Western
Every day.
it's Christendom Tai Chi.
Yeah, that's a
Interesting.
really good way to put it. That's
Wow.
exactly right. So in
Wow.
fact, I've just got a new mace. I'm going to show it to you. This is my brand new. This is actually a very traditional Indian Garda mace, and it's very heavy. Hold on. So this is it.
Whoa.
Wow.
So this is a serious bit of kit.
Yeah.
So if you do sort of half an hour, 40 minutes of that in the morning, you do work up a bit of a sweat, I have to
I
say.
bet.
Yeah.
So do you
But
do that every day?
essential because whilst I have this, romantic view of myself as a sort of swashbuckling field sportsman, the truth is, the vast majority of my life, I'm sitting at my desk reading and writing. And so you have to do something. You have to do something, or you just your back gets crooked and your muscles deteriorate and your immune system drops and your testosterone drops. And as you get older, you realize actually that sitting in this strange hunched position at a desk for 9 hours a day is not what our bodies were
Yeah,
built for.
that's
Um,
right.
so, you have to find something. And I tried lots of different styles of exercise over the years, but there's something about training in a kind of quasi militant, fashion that sort of does it for me, really. So
Well, I'm glad to hear that too, because actually I've been thinking and writing a lot lately about um masculine and feminine iconography in a way you could say. Because I wrote a couple things and I've gotten so much pushback on this stuff. So I wrote something a couple weeks ago about I think there are especially in some trad circles and in orthobro culture, there's a lot of monks, but not enough knights, right?
yeah.
There's people are renouncing the world and retreating into their cell, or we can call it to their computer, but they're not incarnating the knight ethos at all, right? And on the other hand, I've had some criticisms of feminism, which to me it seems to not have taken up the nun and lady archetypes, you could say. But at least in the cultural imaginary right now, what we've been dealing with are we can call it the girl boss, or it may be the trad wife, but also the OnlyFans whore, right? That seems to where did I don't think that's what Germaine Greer or Gloria Steinem saw coming, right? And which is also very open to having trans women and men and women's spaces, which is just surreal if you think about it. And so when Michael Sullivan contacted me and proudly sent me the picture of his mace, and I was like, where did I find? Oh, that was Sebastian's book. Because
What's the history of the mace? I confess to being ignorant. Like I know some of it. But if it
Okay,
was a
well,
symbol, give us a give us a little Wikipedia on the symbol of the mace.
yeah, well, no, I mean, so essentially, the really quick whistle stop tour is that Indian and Persian wrestlers, so North Indian and Persian wrestlers, have been using what they call a Garda for probably 3,000 years. It's a really ancient training tool, and it was essentially because the main move that you build on all the time is what in the West we just call a 360 or a 2 to 10, where you're essentially swinging the mace behind you and pulling it down like this. And what you're essentially doing is building up your shoulders and your core strength. And why that's so important for wrestlers is because if you want to throw somebody, you need really strong shoulders and really good core strength. But also, if you sit at a desk all day, then the thing that you lose is your core strength very quickly. And given that, I've got scoliosis and all sorts of ongoing back problems that really mess with you as you get older, unless you find clever, sophisticated ways of kicking it into the grass, which is essentially what I'm doing by mace training every day. I'm
Wow.
building up my core and my back muscles, so that I start to have the muscles of someone who would essentially work, who would either be an agrarian worker or work down a mine or something. So someone who's constantly picking stuff up and putting things down and all of this sort of thing. Um, and this is so the Garda gives you that kind of strength. So wrestlers, particularly in Persia and North India, have been doing this for 3 millennia. You'll notice if you look up the monkey god of Hinduism, Hanuman, he always carries a Garda with him at all times. And there was a very famous Indian wrestler called the Great Gamma in the early last century, who always trained with a very heavy mace. And he was just undefeated. Any of his opponents, he'd just throw them as if they were made of paper.
Mm.
And so what essentially happened is there's been this shift over the last couple of decades in the West of people going from these isolated training methods on gym machines where you actually need access to a gym because you need a vast number of machines that are going to target very specific muscle groups. People have gone from that to what they call functional strength training, where you're not really trying to build up kind of necessarily the muscles that will massage your vanity, right? But like if you actually look at people who work a 9 hour, 10 hour job as agrarian workers, or people who work down mines, or any of those people, they don't have the body of bodybuilders, right? They don't have great big bulk muscles, but they were unbelievably strong,
Yeah.
unbelievably strong. And that's essentially what you're trying to do. Now, I know this functional strength training is a controversial term, and people who like gyms don't like people talking about functional strength training. But what essentially happened was that MMA fighters. Now, I must at this point add a qualification. I know absolutely nothing about MMA or boxing or those sorts of sports of people injuring one another do not appeal to me in the slightest, and I've never watched them. But what I do know is that MMA fighters started becoming very interested in Indian mace training because it gave them a certain strength in fighting that people were not developing. And so they went from they basically took the idea of the mace and they refined it into something much cleaner, much easier to transport. So here I've got a kind of just a steel mace, which is a much more elegant piece of kit, and essentially that's how it came in, and it's just become more and more popular. I mean, the fact that I really only need two or three pieces of kit that fit very nicely into the corner of my study here. And that's my
awesome.
I've taught it for years. You know, it's and as long as you learn the moves, and what's one other thing, sorry, you've set me off on one. I do like
I like
talking.
it. I like it.
One other thing is that what's very attractive about it is that when you're first learning how to use a mace to exercise and to strengthen yourself, you learn these set moves, or these, you know, set exercises. But when you become confident, you know you can execute them without injuring yourself. What you start doing is the moves in a continuous sequence. And so it ends up being almost like a kind of martial arts kata with
Michael was saying,
with what's essentially like an ancient weapon of war. But you're just training, you're exercising all the time. And, you know, I mean, I literally every morning I go out into my garden, no matter what the weather, and I stand there in my underpants and I move around the garden with an ancient weapon of war. And I think that's, you know, a really cool way to get fit and strong, basically.
And we call that
that's
badass.
great.
Yeah.
What'd you say, Michael?
We call that badass where I come from.
Yeah. It's awesome. Is there any connection to the mitre in like ancient symbolism? I guess when you said mace, I was
Mace,
wondering.
the mace, the imperial mace.
Yeah, or it's like, the shape
Yeah,
is
I mean,
similar.
one of the things that I say in that book on the chapter about, I mean, the chapter about the mace is meant to be a slightly light-hearted piece. But so I can't remember. There's somewhere in that chapter where I basically argue that maces are present at the sources of all of our civilizational institutions. Um, so here I say, in the West, the mace is a symbol of civilization. Maces symbolize jurisdiction and power. They're displayed in parliaments to indicate that they're in session and fully constituted. In the UK, the parliamentary use of the ceremonial mace specifically symbolizes the role of the crown, and the fact that the government gathered there is so gathered as the monarch's government. They're also carried before liturgical processions, marching military troops, and the chancellors and academic staff of the universities, the last of these to indicate the independence and authority of such treasuries of wisdom as indeed they once were. So there you go. I think we've lost Mike.
Or Mike when maybe we'll be back.
Does that happen occasionally?
No. So, but I'll take care of it. He'll be back.
Maybe he thought I was going to read at him for longer than I.
I don't think so. But so the title of the book, Mysticism, Magic, and Monasteries.
Yeah.
So let's talk about mysticism first of all. And you have a chapter in here, I believe it is.
I hope we do visit the point that you raised about monks and knights, because that would be a very interesting conversation to have.
Well, let's go there. Let's go there.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's the first thing to say is that obviously I'm sympathetic to your claim. I think that one of the deleterious consequences of rationalism really is that we are not really a participatory people anymore. We are a strongly observing people, you know. I think we got Mike back.
Looks like it.
And so we're fast becoming a culture where everyone wants to be an expert of everything, but no one's actually involved or implicated in everything. We're just constantly commenting all the time. And now what I think I would say though is that you had the role of the monks in history, and you had the role of these kind of leaders of the laity, these chivalrous characters. And of course the history of the knight is fascinating. Edmund Burke talks about this in his abridgment of English history, where he talks about how essentially the baptism of the nations led to the Saxon warlord and the Roman centurion and these kind of leading figures who essentially would go and kill people and plunder, and they would crush the weak so as to become wealthy and powerful. And what happened with the baptism of this tier of the social organism was that the ideal completely changed. So the knight became the man who protected the weak. That was his fundamental role. And I'm not saying that every knight lived up to the ideals of the chivalric code, but the fact that the ideals radically changed is itself quite important. And so that's a kind of absolutely remarkable transformation. I think the other thing that's really important about that is that the code of chivalry was not an abstract code or a written code. It was a code written on the heart of the knight. It's a code of conduct that is tacit and implicit, and it was regulated by the community of knights themselves who kept each other in check. It's not a code in the Napoleonic sense. It's a code in the kind of um, the sense that Ezekiel gives, where essentially a heart of stone has become a heart of flesh in this transformation of the warlord into the Christian knight. But what I would say is that the knight monk dichotomy is kind of it was overcome by the phenomenon of the crusader, because the crusader is a monk and a knight. You know, the Templars were Benedictines living under the Benedictine rule, who took vows and essentially, I mean, it's actually, when you step back and you think about the Crusader, it's absolutely shocking. It's absolutely shocking what imagine being a 12th century nobleman and saying, well, I'm going to leave everything I know and love, and I'm going to go and live in the desert where it's 45 degrees Celsius, and I'm just going to sit there covered in armor and bake in the hope of protecting pilgrims from being raped and murdered and having their things stolen. And I'm just going to do that for the next 10 or 15 years until somebody stabs me to death. And that's how I'm going to live my life. That's an absolutely extraordinary way to live your life. We can't create men like that today. It's just
No.
to create men like that today.
What was the
No, and
motivation?
Well, they were holy men. That's
Yeah,
the thing.
They were. Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
They were monks. They were holy men.
Yeah.
They were monks with swords and
Yeah.
armor.
Yep. No, right.
and it was interesting when I dropped, actually, was this, it was not in my, it was, I did a video, I think, where I was kind of teasing out some thoughts on this essay. I'm still in the writing. And it was interesting to me, a lot of the pushback I had, because I even explicitly said, and I'm not talking about men living under monastic vows at monasteries. I'm talking about people basically cosplaying, you
Yeah,
know, or there are all these monks out there, and nobody wants to engage the world, right? Nobody wants to go out and do the transformative deed of, of whether it's delivering justice or defending the poor and fatherless, like in Psalm 82, right? Nobody's doing that stuff, or at least not enough people. But it was interesting that people could not make they could not stop thinking in concrete terms, and they couldn't think in metaphor, which is what I was using, right? Which the whole point of this essay I'm writing is about um, a poetic metaphysics in that way. Um, and that's kind of
other people are
yeah,
sorry,
go
go
ahead.
ahead.
No, but what I was going to say is interesting that in Le Morte d'Arthur by Thomas Mallory, that what happens at the end is the orders collapse and the knights in disillusionment all become monks and priests. Lancelot becomes a priest. They all they are their sense of vocation is confused and destroyed. which is in a way what we, and and I've been thinking this for quite a while, that I didn't realize it, but in a way, the myth of our time is the Mort d'Arthur.
Yeah.
Things fall apart, right? So where's the once and future king in this scenario? Or because that's part of what I was writing in the title of this essay I'm working on is actually taken from both Nikolai Berdyaev and Pavel Florensky about the new Middle Ages, which is something they were kind of
Sure.
anticipating was on its way. And I think, your work, Sebastian, and my work, and the stuff we're doing on the Regeneration podcast, it also participates in this anticipation of a new Middle Ages, which is not a new Dark Ages.
Hmm.
Quite the contrary, right?
Well, I mean, it's one thing to say is that, for example, the word on everyone's lips at the moment in the blogosphere and the Substack sphere and everything it is enchantment or re-enchantment.
Mhm.
Um, and here is a very good example, I think, of what you're describing. You have a lot of people at the moment who are now finally accepting that the modern experiment, that we are going to be emancipated from our history, from our civilizational heritage, from our communities, from everything into which we would have been inducted. We're going to be emancipated from all of that in order to be really truly free and be free as individuals and be authentic selves. And we found that actually that hasn't worked at all. We're just traumatized and confused, and that's really what's happened at the end of that process.
Mhm.
And so everyone's kind of accepting that the whole experiment of deracination has been a disaster, and that in some way we're going to have to tap into some kind of tradition, some sort of way of living. And this is just now, all of these themes that I'm describing now are totally mainstreaming, particularly in the Christian
Mhm.
Substack and so on. Everyone's commenting on this stuff, and I often think, how many of these writers are actually doing it though? Right? It's like there are a lot of very traditional skills that there are people still around who know how to do them, and we're going to lose them in a generation, right?
Mhm.
For example, if I walk down the street with my dog here, 5 minutes down the road, there is there's a 10th century Saxon church just there, right? Beautiful church. There is still a team of bell ringers who meet and actually ring these ancient bells in the tower there. But that's going to go because I don't know a single young person who's learning how to ring bells at the moment, and it's a really hard skill to learn as well.
Mhm.
Just these things, whipping in for the local pack of beagles, whatever it is, joining a Morris dancing side, whatever, we mock this stuff, but actually this is our ancient tradition, this is our way
Mm.
of life, it's our way of entering festivity. And it's all very well to blog all day about the process of deracination, but actually there's still enough residue of the culture that we have spent the last century trying to deconstruct to induct ourselves back into it and pass it on to our progeny. But we don't. We just write about it all day instead. You know,
Mhm.
and these things are going to completely disappear.
Yeah, and that's, as Mike knows, that's my primary complaint is people can talk about things all day, but who does anything? Where's the deed? It doesn't enter into the will. You know what I mean? It's fine in the realm of thought and even feeling, right? But to bring things into the realm of the will is a that's where the rubber meets the road. That's where then you'll have to the field of experience in that way where you test out what you can do, and you realize how, in fact, Rudolf Steiner wrote about this 100 years ago, or he commented on this um in the introduction to his agriculture lectures. Aaron Fried Pfeiffer asked him one day, he says, you have all these great ideas, all the, farming, education, but these people can't pick it up. And Steiner said, yeah, it's a problem of nutrition. there's not enough life force in the foods we eat. This is 100 years.
Interesting. Yeah.
There's not enough force in the foods we eat for people to actually put their ideas and feelings into action, which is kind of interesting. Which is, so we live on I live on a biodynamic farm, and of course, most of our diet, as far as meat goes, almost all of it comes from our farm or what I hunt. And there's a big difference, as you know, Sebastian, between eating this kind of clean food compared to even organic food you would get at a store.
Yeah.
There's an enormous difference. I'm not saying it's giving me the power of will to affect change in the world, but it's it's a start, right?
Make a huge difference. It'll make a huge difference. And actually, you know, let the risk of getting a bit conspiratorial about this stuff, I do think that a lot of the food that we are provided is part of a larger dynamic to control people.
Absolutely.
It makes us lazy, it makes us sluggish, it makes us incompetent and slow. It makes us malleable for power holders.
Hmm.
Um, I think that there are a lot of powerful people out there who do not want a strong, vigorous citizenry because it would be very dangerous for them.
And that's not conspiratorial at all. And I think actually that connects to the next thing I want to talk about, because I'm I'm not conspiratorial. I'm actually telling the truth. And I wrote about this about a year ago, um, on my Substack, is what I think not only are people given crummy food and stuff is sprayed in the atmosphere to keep people dumb, and I know it, um, but also the techniques of magic are used. And it's all you have to do if you read Eliphas Levi, for instance, Transcendental Magic. You
Yeah.
read through that book, it's a long book, but you can see there that what he's talking about are actually methods later put in play by first Edward Bernays and then every government across the West, at least.
I agree.
So they're using magic, black magic, as a way to control people. And I'm
Yes.
not being paranoid. I mean, it's just if you read, when I had my students at college read the Edward Bernays book, Propaganda, which for him was a good word, not a bad word. They read the first chapter, and I went into class the next day, and they're all looking at me like, "What's the matter?" They said, "This is what's happening right now." I said, "Yes, I know. That's why I signed
We
the
just
book."
need advertising to have the same visceral sense as black magic, right? Like propaganda, propaganda. Or in the homeschooling movement, when they say your kid's not being socialized, why don't the parents do a happy dance at that point, as opposed to feeling like they need a
Mhm.
rejoinder? But yeah, I mean, the point is, and I wonder too if you mentioned that big percentage that just doesn't feel that they can necessarily do anything, is if we use the Grail myth, and I think of Simone Weil again, that so many people, truth, she wanted to say that untruth is more corrosive than, and it sounds difficult, than like a modicum of injustice, right? And this generation has known that it's been downloaded untruth like it's been a lot of people's jobs for a long time. And hopefully that when we wake them up, I think that the beginning needs to be those simple acts, maybe even before, in some of these trades, like our friend Guido tells us in Italy, they're being massaged out of existence too. The cheesemakers, that they can't do it without entering in the black market. They're cracking down in the black market. But, if I think of Simone's great essay on the right use of school studies, what we need, I think, is twofold. We need young men to start putting themselves into another person's place, right? We know dating culture is dead. Even when they're trying, they're finally asking a girl for coffee instead of just hitting on her online. And when they go out for coffee, all about themselves. And my worry is that they're going to learn how to make cheese before they know how to ask a girl, like, how was your day? You know? And
Right.
I think that's where we've come. And the other one would be, yeah, I think I guess I'd leave it there, kind of starting in those small areas. We just need, because the violence of the comeback is going to be so crazy, that beginning with asking people like how your day was, or as my good friend John Gribwich would say, like, we need an order of monks who can just honestly ask people what they're going through without prejudice, listen to
Yeah.
people without prejudice and things like this, and that seems like a good order of priest monks, just so we need to train those people. We need to train them. And I agree with you on hunting and everything, but my
Well, I think
anticipation. Yeah, Sebastian, thanks.
this ties in very nicely with the question of the knightly metaphor coming back. Because the courtly man knows
Yeah,
exactly
right.
how
Yeah.
to treat other men, knows how to negotiate difficult situations with other men, the tense situations that can arise. He knows how to concede territory in a discussion without
Brilliant.
betraying himself. He knows how to be respectful to women without patronizing them. All of these things, which are not, these can't be taught to somebody in abstraction. These courtly things, I think, are habits that you pick up by being initiated into a courtly culture and a courtly atmosphere. And all of this needs to be brought back in this kind of knightly metaphor that was being discussed earlier. And actually, I mean, okay, this might take us in a direction that you don't want to go in, and it might be a bit controversial, but um, I think we've got to ungay the church, basically. That's kind of a major imperative right now.
Mhm.
We have to ungay the church.
Mhm.
And right now we've got a kind of limp-wristed laity who have no sense that actually there's a very particular apostolate that belongs to the laity, which is the transformation of the temporal arena in the world of family and business and agriculture and all of this stuff. They need to kind of place that under the kingship of Christ. That in itself is very much the church militant, right? And you're going to have to contend with diabolical forces that hate you and want to destroy you. And you're going to have to deal with that. And that means you're going to have the knightly characteristics that make all of that possible. But we've also got a clergy which in large part is basically a gay cabal, right? I mean, more or less, that's what the Catholic clergy is across the whole world.
Mhm.
I did a short stint in a seminary years ago. I've worked in a diocese for 7 years. I know exactly the homosexual subterranean culture that completely uh, controls the direction of the Catholic clergy, and it's a nightmare. And the church will never be able to fulfill its apostolate if it's under this kind of incredibly chaotic uh, 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 power structure. Let's put it that way. And so the clergy, like to me, the opposite of the self-serving, power-hungry homosexual is the knight. That's like the antithesis of that principle. And so it's not just the laity that need this kind of knightly metaphor as a guiding principle for how to fulfill the apostolate, but it's also the clerical hierarchy that require this. And of course, that shouldn't surprise us because the clergy were historically drawn largely from they were the younger siblings of these great families, and most of them had grown up in courtly atmospheres and so on.
Mhm.
And since the clergy shifted and mutated into a kind of self-obsessed, bickering bourgeois class, it's that whole courtly atmosphere that used to orbit the Catholic clergy has largely disappeared. So and so when I say we need to ungay the church, we need to ungay the church in a very literal sense, like literally it's being largely controlled by people with incredibly chaotic appetites. But we also need to ungay the church in a much broader sense of just having a very, very large number of people who are totally frustrated and feminized, essentially. And that now, just to qualify that a little bit, that's not to say that we need to undermine the feminine aspect of the church, which is a very, very important and beautiful aspect of the church, which we need to deeply treasure. But it's a twisted and corrupted and skewed feminine. It's the ecclesiastical Lilith that essentially is the problem here.
Yeah, and what I've been writing about and thinking about is that what happens when you have
I think I'm going to disagree
armed
here
or
with some of the
disabled,
telling. Yeah.
when you have a disarmed or disabled masculine, what's going to fill the void? Well, it's not the feminine. And I think what we've seen, at least in most quarters of feminism, wasn't what Germaine Greer and Gloria Steinem thought was going to be. But what's happened is, and Berdyaev writes about this, that the world hasn't become more feminine because men got weak. Women have become more masculine, you know. And you saw this, especially over COVID, with some of the worst world leaders were women. I mean, especially in the Commonwealth, it was horrible across the Commonwealth, but it's like, I think of Jacinda Ardern in particular, who was just dreadful and like, do not give this person power. And I was talking about this yesterday with, I'm teaching an online class on Shakespeare. We did Macbeth yesterday. And usually Shakespeare's feminine characters are these plucky, great humor, intelligent feminine characters. But in Macbeth, he's really exploring feminine evil, which is weird. I mean, it's a weird thing because Macbeth himself is weak and is so easily manipulated by his wife, who is just, and she says, "Unsex me now, right, you spirits," right?
Exactly.
And we're in that kind of a situation where I think it's been, and I think like this is another example of the black magic run by the powers, is that they've worked over at least a generation to weaken the image of the male, the father, right? If you look at any sitcom, the father's always an idiot, right? They've toxic masculinity, where all these kinds of spells they cast, but there's not a correlative opening of the feminine that way. You can only have a strong feminine if you have a strong masculine. There's no way they do it.
So
Yeah, I'm thinking, and I don't disagree with anything you're saying necessarily, Sebastian, but like the phenomenon I think we're seeing here at the States in current events too is that, like, even if we look at the world of journals, I hear the word, for me, kind of conservative and liberal. But we all know what's going on is that those categories have kind of lost their meaning in this time with their current goings on, especially if we look at like USAID and the National Endowment for Democracy. Crazy, crazy. And so the way our friend Guido would tell it too is, for me, when I look at this phenomenon, is that the one you describe, I think quite accurately, for me, is a subset of the takeover of the left, that the whole postmodern phenomenon isn't necessarily liberal. I would agree on the trans thing is more symbolic than the gay thing for me. But the trans thing holds a little bit more of kind of what's going on, of something that was a conservative phenomenon. It stopped us from talking about class, and I think we're revealing this at this time. The people who wanted to make more were using the trans flag and so forth. But the only insofar as the way you're telling it, for what I'm looking forward is, and I think this is a time for us. We're looking at the anti-war left merging with an anti-war right. And I think I represent that kind of what happened to the left. I always tell people I was born, as Jonathan Haidt would say, with definitely a leftist temperament. I see things, what people have in common before I see how they're different. I see, and I think both are important. So my education had to be in that other way of seeing things. But I think what's going on this time, especially in the church, we need to, they're going to see that the left-wing journals were massaged since since as Michael Benz is saying, since right after World War II, the left-wing journals were massaged by goals of U.S. imperialism, and the right-wing journals were massaged as well. And so certain notions of, at least in America, of nation, of family, which only means the nuclear family, which is easily as malleable as the individual as opposed to the person. The nuclear family, we've had them. They've been the Republican Party's bitch, for a long time. And I know you guys are kind of with me on a lot of that, but I was just, things are happening in real time now. And the whole idea, especially here in the States, that gets that seen as like a right-left thing, is going to confuse more than it illuminates during this time. Yeah.
I think that's helpful. And certainly I think I'm like you insofar as in England, we have a socialist tradition.
Yeah.
Which is a very noble one. It's the old English socialist tradition that people like George Orwell belonged to, that made them really fierce,
so relevant at this time.
Of ideological activity. And if you look up, for example, the Kinder Scout occupation, things that happened in English history, particularly in the 19th century and the early 20th century. In England, we all have access to the countryside. There's the most incredible comprehensive footpath system across the English countryside because it's considered today the common inheritance of all Englishmen to the countryside. But that was completely created by the socialist movement. After the Enclosure Acts, no one could go on the countryside. Yeah. And it was the socialists who pushed for access to the countryside. So we have this kind of very noble socialist tradition in England that is not of a kind of continental Marxist kind.
Interesting.
And we also have a very noble Tory, old Jacobite kind of conservative tradition, which is not classical liberalism. And actually the overlap of old style conservatism or traditionalism in England and old English socialism is incredible. I mean, it's really because in a way, traditionally in England, the working classes and the nobility always had a kind of sympathy with one another that the kind of industrial bourgeois class never really had with either of them. It hated the working class because it knew it used to belong to them and it was embarrassed by that, and it hated the nobility because they thought that they should be the nobility and they could never quite break in, and so there's always been this kind of interesting political tradition that's unique to these isles, and I very strongly identify with that. I don't like hawkish behavior. I don't like classical liberalism. I don't like the way that ongoing alienation, deracination, and atomization has been in some way turned into like a conservative goal. I mean, what the heck is that? I mean, this is so this is why when people ask me where I stand on things, I tend to say I'm a traditionalist in everything. I'm a traditionalist liturgically. I'm a traditionalist politically. I'm also a traditionalist in the Guianonian sense. I really do. I think that a wise man takes the great wisdom traditions of the world extremely seriously. And if you're not, if you want to take things, let's say from the perspective of the centuries, but you just treat as paganism and superstition, the Vedic writings and the Guru Granth Sahib and the poetry of Rumi, then to me your mind is too truncated to really induct yourself seriously into the mystery of the world. And so
that would be the worry here, of course, is that so many of our younger, like if we used in this country, if you use the word kind of the gaying of the church, you're going to very much be kind of right and left. And it would be in our church, it would be the ascendancy of the right. And I'm telling you, the word we need is maturation. We need maturation. There's an immature left. Yeah.
I think I am aware though that if you look at the great post-conciliar orders that have been founded, and were, because of the number of vocations they got, they were given a vast amount of support from the top. You know, the community of St. John, the Beatitudes, the Legionaries of Christ, you know, the L'Arche, whatever it is, every single one of them has turned out to be a grooming operation.
Yeah.
Every single one of them has turned out to be a grooming operation led by either a highly predatory, frustrated man or like an outright homosexual. I mean, look,
It's
I
so sad. It's true. Yeah.
my short stint in a seminary was with an Argentine order called the Institute of the Incarnate Word, and the founder was having sex with the seminarians. Now, fortunately, I've never really been pretty enough for anyone to take much notice of me. But that was going on in these in these seminaries, and he was inviting his best friend Cardinal McCarrick over
Oh,
to
Mo.
to choose, you know, which seminarians appealed to him, and so there's another one, and the list goes on and on and on. Now, this is a complete breakdown of the knightly virtues, right? This is the problem when you don't have gentlemen anymore. Okay, you don't have people who are in control of their appetites,
Yeah.
who
Mature
are
people, mature men. Yeah.
mature
Yeah.
people, really humane people,
Yeah. Yeah.
who, you know,
Totally
who
agree.
know that their appetites are
Mhm.
chaotic. Because guess what? If your appetites are chaotic, join the club, right? But you have to find mature ways of dealing with that and negotiating that throughout your life so that you're not doing untold damage to people and scandalizing
Mhm.
people. And we've had a complete breakdown of that kind of that interior knightly character, which should prevail in a healthy church. And that's really what I mean when I
Yeah. Yeah.
use the phrases I use.
Yeah. No, I'm grateful. I
Yeah,
agree with everything you say.
and it's done untold damage. I mean, even my parish growing up was home to the most notorious pedophile priest in American Catholic history. And when we told, I was no longer an altar boy, I was in high school, but I remember my best friend worked at he lived next door to the rectory and worked at the rectory after school answering phones or whatever. And when this priest asked him to come up to his room and give him a massage, and I remember we told my mom, I said, Mom, Father Shirilla likes boys. And she kept saying, No, boys, you can't talk about that. He's the holy priest. I said, Mom, I'm telling you. And then 20 years later, there was this big expose in the Michigan Catholic newspaper about what happened with this guy. And my mom calls me, and I'm 30. She calls, You can't believe, did you see the Michigan Catholic? I said, What do I have? Father Shirley's in there. He's been doing this stuff to boys for years. I said, yeah, Newsflash. I told you, Mom. Yeah, but I couldn't believe you. He was a priest.
Yeah.
You know where I
Uh,
am with this stuff is the whole, even the word knight. That's provokes me lately. Just, I have to be the whole image, and I get it. Like that book on Soloviev, the knighthood of the divine Sophia. There's no, I'm a magnet for that literature. But I find the word, just like Saint Michael in our time, that's where in this one area, if Rudolf Steiner died and left us nothing, it's not Ahrimanic and Luciferic evil. That's a great insight. It's this idea of Saint Michael in our time instead of being the swashbuckler. All he is a dude with a gesture looking at Sebastian. That we have to step in, that song, Step Into Your Power, and this notion that I was reading on the Divine Sophia recently in a book. But it said, she invites us like to Shekinah in the Old Testament. It's a flickering light where we have to move forward, and it unites eventually with the continuous. So it's discrete and it unites with the continuous. So the nightly stuff, only insofar as it still relates like cosplay for me. And instead of looking at these young men and say mature, ask a girl out face to face, or at least call her. Don't use text. So forgive. I just kind of flip out now with like some of that stuff because I think we're at this age where, and I'm as cool with this weird relationship between the Holy Spirit, Saint Michael, and Sophia. I'm going to figure that out, maybe some of it in my lifetime, but there's a divine feminine element here. But inviting young men to grow up by stepping into themselves and stop with the cosplay, go into your name. When I say, Our Father, hallowed be thy name. I think of like the name God gives everybody. Sebastian Morello, what are you supposed to do now? Mike Sauter. And I think of other people I'm praying for. That's where I pray for the people I have to pray for, is under that. Just step into your name, step into your royal clothes. Any cosplay is gone at this time, you know.
Yeah, and go ahead.
Well, just to say, I completely agree with you, and I
Sure.
think that what you don't, the way that the knightly metaphor has started to connote incredibly unsavory things with like,
Yeah, that's all I'm saying.
yeah, like
Yeah.
weightlifting teenagers with t-shirts on saying
Yeah,
Deus
yeah.
Vult or whatever,
And maybe a Jesus, just a cross or something, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think for me, when I use the phrase, and to be honest, I haven't really used the phrase. I was kind of because Michael was kind of riffing on this, and
Yeah.
I thought, well, let's go for it. Let's talk about this. But the for me, I very much think of Sir Gawain. I mean, I've probably read that poem, I don't know, 20, 30 times. I love it so much. And Sir Gawain to me is the ideal of the knight. I don't know if you guys saw the film that came
I
out
do.
not long
The
ago.
Green Knight one?
Yeah,
Mhm.
one of the saddest things about that film is it begins with Sir Gawain waking up in a brothel, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Don't like it at all.
yeah, and the thing is that in the poem, the defining characteristic of Gawain is the purity of his heart. That's why he
Amen.
gets to fulfill the beatitude. He gets to see God because of the purity of his heart, right? So he and all the other knights of the court, they um they consecrate their adventuring to a certain courtly woman of the court, right? And they become that that woman or this woman's knight, but not Sir Gawain, right? He consecrates his mission to Our Lady. So when he goes to find the Green Knight, he has a shield, and on the inside of the shield is an icon of Our Lady, and on the outside is the pentacle, right? The pentacle, and there's a whole sort of section where it describes the various symbolisms of the pentacle, one of which is the 5 wounds. So he's consecrated to Our Lady. He's clothed in the the graces merited by the sacrifice of Christ on the cross. He has the 5 wounds, and then he has to descend into the chaos of nature, right?
Oh,
Chaotic,
sacrifice, chaos of nature. Yes, 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 yes.
enter very, very deep into that. And what's the thing that gets tested over and over and over again? It's his one defining characteristic, it's his purity. Is he going to betray the person who has provided him with hospitality by responding to the advances of his wife, and therefore he is going to give up his one defining characteristic, which is the thing that's going to cause him to see God, right? It's going to be his purity. And he descends into chaotic nature and he contends with it. And it's by that that he ends up both being humbled and purified and then ennobled. And
Great.
this is what every man has to do in his life. Every single man has to go and contend with the chaos of his nature, right? And he has to know that he can do that by receiving the graces of Christ's sacrifice, by consecrating himself to Our Lady, and then by descending into the chaos of nature, which is going to try and kill you, right? It's going to try and destroy you. And somehow you have to come out of that humbled but ennobled by it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then what the whole court see that, and they all decide to wear the green sash. Every knight decides to wear the green sash in honor of Sir Gawain because he's come out the other side of this initiatory, purificatory journey, and he's now on, the unificatory course, right? And then he's entered back into the courtly life of the knight. And this is the thing: every guy has to go through this in his life. Every single man, if he is going to be someone who is remotely admirable, he's going to have to go and contend with chaotic, very powerful nature, and somehow come out not decapitated.
Mm-hmm. That's wonderful. I love that.
Yeah,
Um,
that's the journey. Yeah.
Now, and I think also, I really hated that movie, I have to say. I could not make it too far into it.
Yeah.
Um, Even though my friend
It's USAID. Just
Kyle was
kidding.
really recommending it to me, I said, okay, I'll watch it. I'm like, I lasted 20 minutes. Um, but here's the interesting thing. So I'm thinking about in Marc d'Artour and the Arthurian literature, what happens there is the masculine mage, Merlin, gets emasculated, and then the feminine magic, you could say, with Morgan Le Fay takes over. But it's also weird because they're the ones who take Arthur to Avalon later. But there's a weird thing going on there. But I think of course, I'm fresh off of Macbeth and thinking about feminine magic, but I think you could say that a lot of what has happened to young men over the last generation or so has been a kind of feminization or a feminine magic that has been promoted by propaganda and in words and spelling and toxic masculinity, right? These kinds of things. My question is, what is the white magic answer to that?
Well, as you know, I'm a big fan of Abbot Trithemius, and I've been thinking a lot about angelic agency, and how that works. Because strictly speaking, angels are not supernatural creatures, right? They're just part of nature. They're part of the created order, right? They're only supernatural insofar as they receive grace, and therefore participate in the divine life of God. So angels are supernatural in the same way as kind of baptized people are supernatural, right? That's the way they're supernatural. So if magic is a natural power, and I think it is a natural power, then it's bound up with angelic agency in the world. And so I think it's absolutely essential that Christians become very intimate with the angels, right? And they take very seriously the role of angels in, because that's kind of our situation. We have found ourselves in a cosmos that is at war. Okay. And a part of that war is that the gods, the small g gods, are fighting one another because some are evil and some are good. And, we're these sort of, as I said, chaotic and often stupid people, but somehow we've found ourselves enmeshed in this battle that's going. Um, and so we've got to get to know the gods, right? And Abbot Trithemius gives all of these incredible methods by which to become uh intimate with the angels, so that angelic power and angelic agency just becomes part of your spiritual life. Um, and some of that can be a bit strange, like the whole notion of calling the angels into crystals and things like this that Abbot Trithemius talks about. That angels can take on a hylomorphic relationship with certain material objects and actually kind of become present in the objects. Um, carrying angels about in your pocket or whatever. It can get kind of weird, some of this stuff. But thank God for it, because it breaks us out of some of our rationalistic assumptions and prejudices that come so easy to us in modernity. But this, I think, is absolutely essential, because I think that great power holders in the world know that evil angels exist, and they know that they will grant them power, and they want to be on their side. Um, you know, Epstein built a temple to Moloch on his island, right? It's like
Mm.
these
Yeah.
people take this stuff really seriously.
Oh, absolutely.
They take it incredibly seriously, and we do. We need to too. Right
Hmm.
now, the angels are. Rupert Sheldrake talks about being with. I can't remember who. He's talking about being with a friend who claimed to be able to see angels, and they went into a cathedral together. And this lady said to him that the whole cathedral was full of angels. And Rupert Sheldrake said, well, what do they look like? And she said, well, they look depressed.
Hmm.
And he
I can
said,
only imagine.
Yeah, and he said, why? And she said, well, because they're all unemployed. Um, and and so I'm very interested in this idea of you know, as the psalmist says, the God that we believe in is the God of gods.
Yeah,
And I think it's very important that we take seriously the role of the gods in this battle and also in our own lives of
great.
Mhm.
nation. It's crazy when you open the scriptures, the angels are on every page of the scriptures. You know, the practice of incubation is there all over the place. People are constantly falling asleep, entering the dream world. Angels are appearing to them, giving them messages, telling them where to go. All kinds of things are going on. You know, you have the magi astrologically reading the grammar of the
Right.
stars. All of this is happening. You talk about any of this stuff with your average well catechized Roman Catholic today, and they'll think you're a New Ager or whatever. And yet it's just the scriptures are just
It's there.
Yeah.
saturated.
Hmm.
And I'm glad you mentioned astrology because watching, I'm a pretty decent astrologer, but watching the movements of the planets and the movements of the worldly powers over the last decade or so, they know they are absolutely have been trying to capitalize on the movements of the planets to acquire more power. But what I think's happened, and I wrote about this, and now it's turning out I was right, that I predicted about a year ago that because of the movements of the planets right now, that the jig would be up,
Right.
and through this year. But here's the thing, though, right? I think the way the propaganda works is they try to tell you this stuff doesn't work, that magic doesn't exist, that astrology doesn't work. So, so good Catholic people in the pews don't pay attention to it, and you become then a victim of these people like, and I think Sebastian's right, who are actually working with the dark forces, the dark angels, the dark gods. They are. It's clear that they are. Moloch,
Isn't it
right?
like all things that like, yeah,
Now, I couldn't believe when Father James Martin, S.J., came out the other day, all upset that USAID got shut down. I don't recall him ever being upset that there were 300,000 children missing from coming across the border. I don't recall that at all, right? You pick you pick your battles. But I think the other part of it is that, and we know this, like we were talking about Sir Gawain the Green Knight or the Grail literature. We don't have in magic, if you read Levy or anybody, right? Magic works through two ways: image and word. And we don't have the images. We don't have people inhabiting not enough anyway, inhabiting the image and the word in this powerful way. Tolkien did. Tolkien knew this, right? Lewis knew it. But we don't have enough people right now inhabiting that world and bringing, like I've talked, like when my book, what's the name of it? Mythologies of the Wild. Oh God, that's what the project was there to see what the stories that the land, that the spiritual world through the land was telling me, right? And I think, and I was thinking of, I was actually some of those poems, I was thinking of them as magical acts as I was writing them. That was the intention. Because when you put this
That,
into
that
the world, it has an effect.
that collection of poems that you wrote, I was out last year in the Great Karoo to hunt black wildebeest, and we had been hunting for maybe 3 4 days, and it's incredibly demanding. It's like you're going over for 10 11 12 hours a day, heavy rifle on your back, um razor sharp iron stain under your feet, and it's just it's the toughest hunting on earth, you know. It's so tough. Um and we sat down in this little valley. Um, we there was this river going by, and we filled up our water bottles. We made a fire, and we were cooking some food for our lunch. And I read to my hunting companions your poem, "The Huntsman." from that
Mm.
book. I had it in my rucksack during our hunting trip, and it was like the whole landscape came alive with the words. It was like the landscape was already pregnant with meaning and purpose, but it needed to be said. And that poem kind of captured um the 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 magic of the terrain itself. It was just perfect. Anyway, I
You know,
thought you for it.
that's one of the many services we provide.
I just pulled out my copy. I haven't spent a lot of time with it, and I pulled it out this morning and put it right on my coffee table. Because I
Great.
know there's going to be gems in there. Yeah.
Well, but I mean, you know, whether I did it, the point is, I mean, poetry is magic,
Mhm.
and we are a civilization that doesn't read much poetry.
No, and that's
Yeah.
part of the movement we're moving into right now. Can we get young men to read poetry? Because we're getting to a blend. If we came from the East to the West, like Owen Barfield, what is final
Yeah.
participation? But
And
we're bringing together the age of science with the age of poetry in a higher synthesis.
well, and the chivalric ideal was not just somebody who was a warrior and a protector, but
Right.
somebody who was also learned in music and poetry, right? And something we've lost. And those are the things you see with the cosplaying knights, who iron sharpens iron kind of guys. They don't have they don't have that, which is that's the Sophianic element that's missing from
Yeah.
that. So it's just a one-sided thing, and it's just a caricature then. It's a stereotype,
Mhm.
which is the challenge, right? Is how do you keep from becoming a stereotype?
That's why I pray up the Sophianic element to it so much. The great Trappists I know say you can't be a man without marrying your life in some significant way. And this idea of the divine feminine as Shekinah, as the golden thread. Young men are so attracted to that line from Blake. It's
Hmm.
like it meant for their time.
Yeah.
They eat it up like spaghetti, and because it says something to them. And the fact that it can be the divine feminine, because they don't know how to talk to a girl. They're very in a neat way. We don't need, for me, we just lay that before them and say, don't follow the preordained courses of pursuing, I'm making more money than I did last year. I have a little more power than I did last year. That is not your path through the desert. Your path through the desert to turn you from a boy into a man is following that discontinuous light, beep by beep, taking chances into the unknown, the uncertain, and becoming a man somewhere along that journey, then returning home. And that I think they're coming to it. They want it. But I think
Yeah.
um, that's the idea of the Shekinah, or if the Sophianic is kept in that musical register, that's the one
Mhm.
most called for in our time. I just find Saint Michael is something guys are hiding behind too much, especially in the world of pornography. Let Saint Michael do my fighting for me in that demon, as I continue to consume like a crazy person.
Well, yeah, I mean, even the idea of the night before being dubbed, it spends the night in prayer, in vigil,
Mhm.
right? And those things. And the other thing and I've been talking about this forever, but and actually in this essay I quoted our friend Arthur Versluis
Right.
from his book Wisdom's Children, where he calls it theosophic chivalry coming from Burma, but it's Sophianic as well. But the idea is to make yourself worthy. That's, I think, a big thing that's missing from the magical formulae out there is there's not the element in iron sharpening iron to have to be worthy of something,
I
to
like
be
your
worthy of the
characterization of that.
lady's affection. And that was kind of a dumb kid. I thought that's how getting a girlfriend was. I had to, no, I have to be like in a Brave New World where the Lenina is throwing herself at the savage and he says, no, I must earn you first,
Yeah.
right? That doesn't exist.
And the whole sense of humor that you do find in Don Quixote, right? That's
Yeah.
the higher, that's final participation. You know,
Hmm.
seeing Jesus as part Asiatic, the humor, let it be there. That's the Charlie Chaplin, the equality of all souls. All humor is the non-recognition of the equality of all souls. That's from John Cowper Powys. I just think that's an insight for our time. The
There you
people
go.
who don't get it, like, I'm not born better than you, man. You know, and then let's talk. Let's talk. Um,
All right.
you know,
Well, looks like we're getting where we should start wrapping
sure.
up. So I get a few questions for now.
Bring it
Sebastian,
on.
has this book came out? Where'd it go? I just put it someplace. There it is. This came out at the end of last year, correct?
I
Yeah.
can't wait to read it.
Came out at the end of 24?
Yeah.
Yes. And I know you have at least two in the hopper, right? What's coming up?
So there's Woodland Philosophy, for which you have written the preface. So you're quite familiar with that
You're
work.
very good at that, Michael. You're a great preface writer. Your Novalis preface is
The
excellent.
prefacer, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's about the subheading of that book is Meditations on Hunting, Hiking, and Holiness. So it's about getting outdoors, basically, and why we need a spirituality of the landscape, a
Hmm.
spirituality of outdoorsmanship. We basically need to get off our screens. I know the irony of saying that in this current
On the
conversation.
screen. Yeah.
Where we
Yeah.
are.
Um, so that's that book. And then the other book, which I think you've read, actually, yes, you have read, is my sort of first attempt at fiction, uh, called The Hare and the Hex, which
And I
is,
love it. I absolutely loved it when I read it.
it was kind of mad. I read a huge number of folk tales and fairy tales to my children. We have just an enormous collection that I've collected over the years. Um, I'm a descendant of the Brothers Grimm, so it's sort of in the blood.
Wow.
And my great grandmother was Stanisławia Grimm, and so I always wanted to write a really good fairy tale, and I wanted to write something for my children, and I wanted it to be 7 chapters. I wanted to be able to read a chapter a night over a week to my children, and it was very strange. I basically wrote the whole thing almost in a kind of trance-like state. It was very, very strange. I just kind of locked myself here in my cabin and basically ate and drank nothing and just churned out this story. And it really did feel like I was in a trance-like state. It was very weird. And it's an extremely theophanic, sophianic tale. And I really hope that it conjures in the hearts of its young readers a wonder about the world and about the great adventure that is their lives, you know.
Mhm.
I look
Now,
forward to
where is
reading
that
it.
one in the production process? Do you
I
know?
think I think it's going to come out in November.
November?
Hmm.
So
There's a
I
little
I
to
may end
wait.
up editing it, I think.
Okay, cool. My brother, who has done the front cover because he's an artist. He's done the front cover for Woodland Philosophy, and he's now doing all the illustrations for the Hare and the Hex.
Oh,
So
good.
it's going to be a brothers Morello production.
Oh, that's awesome.
The Descendants of the
And in
Grimms.
fact,
Yeah.
well, because when John Reese, my publisher at Angelico Press, sent me your book to ask me what I thought, usually I'll just send him an email or write up a one-page evaluation or take on it. But I called him up. I said, "You got to publish this book. This is such a great book.
That's great.
We need this." And this is actually what I was talking about with we don't have the vocabulary of images and words, but with this book that I mean, with all of Sebastian's work, but this one in particular, with planting those images and words in the hearts of the young, building the imagination. That's I mean, that's what we and that's so needed. And I think about often our friend Tara the other day,
Eek. Yeah.
Tara Thiki,
She's
she
always on the right side of everything. It's an
well
occupational hazard. Yeah.
she posted something the other day on X about how stupid children's books are these days. How we treat children like idiots. And you think about the golden age of children's literature, of Eleanor Fargen, and even Lewis Carroll, and the Beatrix Potter, which did not treat children like idiots. right?
I mean, this is why well, it's not the only, I love these stories anyway, so I didn't just get them for the children, but I built up this very big collection over the years. Romanian folk
Oh,
stories,
mhm,
Old English folk stories, Hungarian and Middle European folk stories, are
mhm,
just loads of them. And they're so rich and they're so beautiful. And then the classics like Anderson's and all of those. And I mean, so it was explained to me that Anderson's The Snow Queen is basically an analysis of the Cartesian spell on the human mind.
mhm.
It's like
Absolutely.
flipping heck. You read it and you can't believe it. And then I read to my children The Wind in the Willows a couple of years ago. And I mean, there's a chapter in The Wind in the Willows where Ratty and Mole are going down the river and they come onto this island and they undergo an epiphany, and the embodiment of the natural order appears before them
Hmm.
as this kind of woodland god.
Mhm.
And they basically have this kind of theurgy inside this spinney on an island with the embodiment of nature. I mean, the kind of what the intimations that authors were offering to children in these works are
A
just
beautiful way of saying it.
Mhm.
completely beyond anything we can
Mhm.
produce.
Yeah.
Completely.
And I don't know if you know this, The Little Gray Men by B.B. Do you know this one? You might want to get that for your children. There's a sequel. I can't remember the Down the Something Stream, which he wrote, and he was a hunter too. He wrote in the middle, maybe 30s, 1930s, about 100 years ago, British. And his books are also inhabit in that imaginative landscape in a way that is not condescending, and it's nourishing to the souls of the young. That's the thing. And those are some of the, actually John Macefield's book, The Box of Delights, was another one that my two youngest just love that book.
Right.
All right. Well, we should probably wrap it up now. There's a lot. I mean, you have a lot coming down in this year. Where do people keep in touch with you in the meantime, Sebastian?
Well, it's tricky. I don't know. I'm really not a social media sort of chap. I'm always trying
To
to
your credit, to your credit.
so I write stuff for the Spectator, for the European Conservative, for anyone who will publish
I'm
me.
writing this down. Yeah.
I've got these books coming out with Angelico Press and Aruka Press over the coming sort of 10, 12 months. Um, and well, I mean, look, I've just applied for a couple of jobs on your side of the pond, so who knows?
Wow.
I might
Can you drop any hints to the listeners or no? Let's go.
I would prefer not to
Okay,
now,
fair. Yeah.
but I'll let you guys know if anything comes of it.
Yeah.
And I think it's you know there's a it's been very nice in these discussions getting to know you, Mike, and obviously
Oh, likewise. Yeah.
with Michael. I've been reading your material over the years, and it would be so wonderful to meet you both in person. So I'm
Likewise. Yeah.
hoping that at
Okay.
some point we'll have a pint or something.
Yeah.
We'll,
Yeah. Yeah.
we'll see
Great.
what the Lord has in mind.
Yeah.
But anyway,
Let's see if
Sebastian
Colin.
Morello, thank you so much for
Yeah, we'll link to our listeners to some of your good stuff, and can't thank you enough, Sebastian. Always edifying. Yeah.
Great pleasure for me. Thank
Okay.
you.
And
See you
thanks
soon.
everybody to listening to the Regeneration podcast, Michael. We'll try to be a bit more regular. We're an occasional podcast, and thanks for following us, listeners. You've been very supportive, and we look forward to doing a few more soon, I'm sure. Yeah.